Next up on the agenda here for carbohydrates is just looking at, how much consumption patterns here in the United States. And, it's not going to be very shocking that the vast majority of macros, carbohydrates, we get plenty of. The only bad thing about, excuse me, the carbohydrates that we do consume is that they are very highly refined. So there's a lot of processing that goes into them, a lot of added sugars. And the great thing about that is it can stay on a shelf for 6 months, 12 months. I don't know. It can stay on a shelf for a really long period of time. That's the good thing about it. The bad thing about it is added sugars, and we need to keep this to less than 10%. Of your carbohydrate consumption. If you're not looking at a food label, if you don't know how much added sugars are there, then this is really difficult. And then this is where you're going to see a lot of weight issues manifest themselves because of the unfortunate added sugar component. Okay. In developing nations, they don't have that issue. Of course, they're going to have a lot of other issues. And we'll definitely see that when we start talking about protein. When we see a lot of malnutrition, we don't see that here in the States, okay? But they eat a lot of whole grains. They eat a lot of vegetables, potatoes, stuff that is all unprocessed. So, they have that going for them. But there's other issues that they have that we'll talk about when we get into proteins that we don't necessarily have here in the States. It's not a big issue, unless you're talking about neglect or some kind of abuse where you're not feeding the child properly. But again, that's a very, very, very small percentage. At least I hope. I don't know the percentage. I hope that's a small percentage. So there are some things that are plus and minus here. Here you can kind of see where kind of everything is. There's the typical American diet. About 48% of our calories come from carbohydrates. And remember, the AMDR is anywhere between 45% and 65% is the AMDR. If we remember from the AMDR for carbs is 45 to 65%. So 48% is actually pretty dang good. It's within the ballpark, but it's the type of carbohydrates that we consume. We consume a lot of processed, a lot of added sugar, okay? And that is not a great thing. So here's numbers, here's data, here's science saying, well, hell, we're within the proper range of the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, AMDR. Okay? But if you do a deeper dive into it, it's looking at the type of carbohydrate that we're consuming. Processed, added sugars, stuff that have a high glycemic index. And we'll look at that here in a little bit as we kind of get through some of the notes section here. We'll get into how we rate carbohydrates and how they affect the body. Excuse me. If you're looking for like how much of a calorie consumption this is, I've written this down. That's the amount of carbohydrates that you're looking to consume. Anywhere between 225 to 325 grams of carbs each day is kind of what this percentage is based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. So these are the grams of carbs per day. Okay, just FYI, if you're curious. I'm not going to ask that on the exam. If I'm asking a question on an exam, a short answer question, looking at issues with the American diet, which I may ask about a condition like diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, you got to make sure you read the whole question. But if I ask you to explain a little bit about, what the condition is and what this means as a population, this would be the thing that you would look at right here to kind of reinforce this concept of we don't need to consume any more added sugar. Here is about 18% of our energy. It comes from that added sugar component. How many calories is that a day? That's a whole hell of a lot of calories per day. That's a whole hell of a lot of calories per day, especially with a 2,000 calorie per day diet. If this is 18% and you're only getting 1,500, that's a hell of a lot more. That's a hell of a lot of a greater percentage associated with that. Okay, so understanding how many calories you're consuming per day allows you to make these percentages mean anything. So you have to know this number. Writing everything down, having a book, have a sheet of paper, write everything down that you eat. Add it up, figure it out. You can figure out your calories per day pretty easy at that point. With the NutriCalc software, I think you have access to it for upwards of a year, I believe. Okay, so continue using it when you're done here. It's a great tool to use when you're trying to figure out, am I eating the right stuff? Okay. Soft drinks and energy drinks are the primary sources for all this added sugar. We've done a little bit better in this area. In this terms, it's actually the consumption of these two things, soft drinks especially, have gone down quite a bit. It's really one of the few things that we've done actually pretty good from the last CDC analysis of our diet in 2015 or 2017 compared to now, but this is the vast majority. Again, it's bold, it's probably important. You should limit that added sugar intake to less than 10% of your total calories. Again, you got to know how many calories you're consuming to see if you're under that 10%. Okay. If you eat fresh fruits, you still get your sugars. Fructose is a natural sugar. You're fantastic. You're fine. Okay. It's a high fructose corn syrup that kind of will get into that, and that's fructose gone Frankenstein. But if you're eating fresh fruits with natural fructose, you're perfectly fine. Okay. Read labels, use sugar alternatives that we talked about earlier, and reduce portion size. That's probably a big one. The biggest eye-opening things for the vast majority of people when they are doing their diet analysis is seeing just how many calories they're eating, but then portion size is a huge one, and that has a huge effect on how many calories you do consume within a day.